Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft, welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. Joining me this afternoon is Pat Hughes. He's the co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, illinoisopportunity.org, a C4, which is just a tax designation, but a political and policy advocacy organization. And Pat, an interesting proposal from State Representative Dave McSweeney from Barrington this week, a proposal that would exempt manufacturers in Illinois from the state's 5.25% corporate tax. This would apply to, this is against the backdrop, I should say, of Illinois shedding another 14,000 plus manufacturing jobs in 2015.
Well, certainly, Dan, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show. Something has to be done. Illinois has, I think, the highest property taxes in the country. It has among the highest workers' compensation costs and unemployment insurance costs in the country. And those three costs together make it very difficult for manufacturers to do business. Obviously, they have big facilities. They pay high property taxes. They have a lot of employees, so these other structural costs impact them. And when you have Indiana and Wisconsin and Iowa right next door that don't have these similar cost structures in place, and you're looking to expand or relocate your business, it's very inviting to do that and still keep the amenities of being around the Chicago area. So something definitely needs to be done, or we're going to continue to bleed manufacturing jobs.
Yeah, it's tough to compete with India when you can't even compete with Indiana. We're joined now by the aforesaid State Representative Dave McSweeney from Barrington. Dave, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan, and keep up the great work. I appreciate all you're doing and calling for lower taxes and less spending in this state. We need more voices like that.
Oh, well, I do what I can. Don't make a big thing about it. But this legislation that you introduced, now let me challenge you on this a little bit, because I know you're a free market guy, as I am. And my initial reaction to it is, well, wait a second. Why are we going to do this game with the rent seekers that big government types do? We're going to have the government picking winners and losers. If you're in manufacturing, you don't pay the state's corporate tax, but if you're in any other sector, you do. Isn't that a bit of unfair treatment? Why don't we just cut taxes or exempt all businesses from taxes across the board?
Yeah, I favor cutting taxes across the board. In fact, there's talk about major tax increases in Springfield, and I'm leading the opposition to them. My view is that we need to have a strong manufacturing sector in this state. That we've lost 38% of manufacturing jobs since 2001. I don't want to pick winners and losers. In fact, that's what these edge credit programs do. You have politicians in Springfield picking winners and losers, picking specific companies. I want to create a better business environment in this state, and we just lost headquarters for General Electric. You might have seen over the last few days. And my view is I want to create an environment so we have manufacturing companies in this state. We continue to lose them to states like Indiana and Texas who have pro-growth economic policy. So I definitely want to cut taxes across the board. I'll never support a tax increase, but I think it's much better to create an economic environment in which companies will locate and be attracted to Illinois than try to just allow them to go to other states. So I don't want to pick specific companies, but I think we have to have a strong manufacturing sector in this state, and that's why I want to totally eliminate the income taxes for manufacturing companies, only for their Illinois income. And I think it's a way to create additional jobs and opportunities in the state.
Hey, Dave, it's Pat. How are you?
Good. How you doing, Pat?
Good to talk with you. Take the folks who are listening to the program today through the political realities of legislation like this. Obviously, Mike Madigan, who's the Speaker of the Illinois House, has a super majority by one vote. Supermajority allows you to override the governor's veto if you keep your caucus in place. And then, of course, Senate President Cullerton also has a supermajority. Obviously, Governor Rauner is in place and may support this type of legislation. How do you sort of build a coalition between now and prior to the 2016 elections where you could see some change in the bodies that are in the General Assembly to get legislation like this out of committee and then heard for a vote on the floor and hopefully passed?
Well, first, I guess we need more Republicans in Springfield, and obviously they've been helping lead the effort for that. And that's obviously the most important thing, so we can actually implement a pro-growth agenda. But on this specific piece of legislation, I think it's attractive to a number of Democrats downstate. The manufacturing economy in the state, because of our high tax policy, because of the uncertainty, is actually destroying jobs. So we need to fundamentally change our budget structure reform. Dan, I like the article you recently wrote about structural reforms in the budget. That's true. But we also need to adopt pro-growth economic policies in manufacturing. Is very important throughout the state. So I've actually received some positive encouragement from Democrats, especially downstate Democrats, who believe that we need to have a strong manufacturing base in the state. But electing more Republicans is essential.
We're talking to State Representative Dave McSweeney, Republican from Barrington. And Dave, your district up there in Northwest Cook, Lake County, people don't necessarily immediately think of that as an area of manufacturing, but it really is. Even in Barrington, there's some high-tech manufacturers up there, machine shops. And I wonder what kind of feedback you're getting from manufacturers. I mean, in terms of the effectiveness of this legislation, were it to become law. Are they saying, look, Representative, if this becomes law, then Illinois becomes a lot more attractive place for me to stay and perhaps even expand, and I'll consider doing one of those two things rather than leaving?
Well, the feedback I've received so far is that it's a very positive step. It doesn't solve the issue, but it makes it more likely that they'll stay in Illinois. They also want to see workers' comp reform. They want to see property tax relief, and they want to see this budget mess finally resolved so that we have certainty in the future. But I think it's definitely a step with other parts of the pro-growth agenda that'll keep manufacturing companies in the state. More importantly, will hopefully attract manufacturing companies. Again, I want to cut taxes across the board. That's the best way, as Ronald Reagan taught us, to create jobs in this country. But so far, the feedback's been very positive. And
you mentioned this kind of at the outset, but it bears maybe more specificity. Those kind of our version of the Department of Energy grants for Solyndra and the like. You don't want the state of Illinois or any state agency involved in this company gets a tax credit and this company doesn't. That specific picking of winners and losers, it's different to do it sector-wide where you've got essentially a level playing field, at least within the sector. That's different than the EDGE tax credit. So would you suggest that as part of moving your legislation, the EDGE tax credit program be discontinued because it's unnecessary if we have the kind of tax relief you're proposing?
Absolutely. I've already called for eliminating the EDGE program. It's cronyism. It's at its worst. And if people in Springfield picking winners and losers, what we should do is allow the market to work. And that's what this does. It doesn't pick any winners and losers in manufacturing. If you have a positive net income only on your Illinois income that's associated with manufacturing, then you're going to have additional money to invest in the business, pay higher wages to your workers. But I favor eliminating the EDGE program. It's crony capitalism at its worst.
Hey, Dave, it's Pat again. I agree with you 100% on EDGE. Give the listeners some hope about this upcoming election in 2016 in the state of Illinois. Obviously, in order for free market principles to be enacted into public policy, we've got a governor in place who's willing to sign that type of legislation. But other than crossing the aisle with downstate Democrats, it's a heavy lift to get our policies across the finish line. What is your sort of outlook on 2016 in the legislative races?
We have to pick up seats. Right now, Madigan has a supermajority, and there's only one way to defeat Michael J. Madigan. That's to pick up seats. And I think when you look at how close we came and a number of the races that you were involved in the last time around, we need to get our voters out. That's really the message, that if people want change in this state, they need to vote in November, and they need to vote for conservative Republicans. And not just any Republican. Again, I'm a Republican and want to see a majority. We need to make sure we get conservatives down there, people who are willing to fight, people like Jeannie Dives and Tom Morrison and Mark Batnick and Keith Wheeler, people who are making a difference down in Springfield. Steve Anderson's another guy who's actually been fighting the battle on taxes and spending. But that's what is essential, is that people get out to vote, they talk to their neighbors. These races were so close last time around. If we could flip in 2016, which is a tough cycle, 4 or 5 seats, we're set up to take potential control. We should be talking about taking control of the House in 2018, but we have to pick up the seats this time around.
We're talking to State Representative Dave McSweeney, Republican from Barrington. And Dave, look in your crystal ball, and over the next year, before that 2016 election that you just described, in terms of how critical it is and the need to pick up seats, do you expect any kind of budget deal? It seems to me that right now, any budget deal, because of the position that Mike Madigan, the House Speaker, and John Cullerton, the Senate President, have taken, any budget deal would be a tax increase. So is it better that we limp along for the next 10 months and Rauner doesn't give in on that, and we see if the balance of power changes in November, or as others are suggesting, we need to cut some kind of deal between now and then?
I don't think there's any deal to cut involving a tax increase, because that would be a disaster for the state. What we should do, and I do think the governor should call us back in special session, is stay in Springfield as long as it takes to adopt a budget without a tax increase. And again, I'll go back to what you wrote. I talked to an old friend of yours, Steve Rauschenberger, who's a budget expert too, and he talks about the whole thing. And we should be talking about structural budget reform. Look what they're doing in other states on Medicaid with private vouchers. There is a constitutional path to pension reform. We should force that issue. My concern about no budget, Dan, is the deficit's increasing every day.
Right.
So by not having a budget, we're actually spending more money than we did last year. So I don't think that's an acceptable solution, but I don't think adopting a tax increase under any circumstance is the way to go. We've done nothing to restructure the state government in the state of Illinois. We know how the money is wasted. There was a recent article about how DCFS, and I know how you care about developmentally disabled children and disadvantaged children, and we just let federal funds go because people didn't fill out paperwork. So how could we ask taxpayers to pony up more money for a system that is absolutely broken in this state? So my view is we need a budget without a tax increase, and the longer that we wait, the worse it gets, because the deficit's growing every day. But a tax increase is a disaster in the state.
All right. He is State Representative Dave McSweeney, Republican from Barrington. Representative McSweeney, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Right. Thank you for having me on. Bye.